What's good? It's Woog. Wow. Callum Smith, 27-0, is defending his WBA Super-Middleweight 168-pound title versus Saul Canelo Alvarez. 51 wins, 1 loss, and 2 draws. This fight is set to take place on December 19th, 2020 at the Alamo Dome in San Antonio, Texas. So 30-year-old boxing legend Saul Canelo Alvarez is now freed from his obligation to Golden Boy Promotions and is therefore also freed from fighting on the platform DAZN since Canelo's contract was with Golden Boy and not with DAZN directly, while Golden Boy Promotions had their deal with Canelo and then a deal with DAZN. So through Eddie Hearn, Canelo in this upcoming fight versus Callum Smith is going to be fighting on DAZN's platform, just not with the Golden Boy Promotions acting as middleman. So Canelo is currently operating as a fight-by-fight free agent, and he's making his first opponent in this new post-Golden Boy Canelo era, Callum Smith, an undefeated champion at 168. Callum Smith is a nice fighter. He retired George Groves to capture the WBA title in the World Boxing Super Series finale in 2018 after beating Eric Skoklin and Nicky Holtzen in the earlier rounds. Smith knocked out Hassan Endem, the veteran former title challenger, just after that in 2019, Smith defending his new title for the first time. That was a spectacular looking knockout, by the way, on DAZN. And remember Rocky Fielding, that tall but clearly outmatched 168-pounder lesser champ who Canelo went up in weight to destroy in like the 3rd or 4th round, walking him down and dropping him to the body multiple times? Well, Callum Smith knocked him out in the 1st round back in 2015. So over the past few years, Smith has been developing his reputation as one of the best boxers out of the UK, non-heavyweight. Smith is good. Very tall, 6'3", very hard puncher, devastating right hand. Although it was kind of a check left hook upside the head that put George Groves in trouble in Smith's knockout win for the title. But I'll get straight to the point. I think that the most likely outcome is that Canelo not only wins, but puts a resounding beating on Callum Smith here. Because Canelo, fight after fight, is just looking like a generationally exceptional fighter. No, he's not the true 168-pounder here, just like he wasn't the true 175-pounder against Kovalev. But remember Michael Jackson in that classic Thriller video when he looks at his date and says, "I'm not like other guys. I mean, I'm different," before turning into a werewolf? Well, Canelo's not like other fighters. Look at the guy's neck. Whether 154, 175, 160, or 168, the guy's just built like a shark. He's only 5'8", but he's solid, fast-handed, powerful. And he's got one mean-ass fighting spirit within him. Man, we have been wanting the Triple G versus Canelo fight for like 3 years before it finally happened. And a part of me kind of wondered whether Canelo really wanted smoke with Triple G, because Canelo was at 154 and Triple G was just an extraordinarily vicious and powerful 160-pound champ. I wouldn't have even held it against Canelo if he wasn't interested in fighting Golovkin, if he'd been seeing what we'd been seeing over the past 5 years from Triple G, who was just knocking everybody but Daniel Jacobs out. Seriously, there was a 9-year stretch from 2008 to 2017 where he won 23 fights in a row by knockout. At the time he finally fought Canelo, he was 35 years old, but still held the WBA, the WBC, and the IBF titles at middleweight. Triple G was a beast, and Canelo has now fought a nearly even 24 rounds with the guy without hitting the canvas once, being awarded a draw in their first fight and a decision win in the rematch. Very controversial results for 2 otherwise very interesting fights. Whether you thought Triple G or Canelo won, I thought Triple G won the first time and the second was about even. But either way, you don't be mad at Canelo. Take issue, if anything, with the judging, but not with the fighters. Canelo just stepped in and fought the middleweight boogeyman, blow for 24 rounds. I mean, Triple G, to me, is probably a top 5 all-time middleweight. And Canelo hung with him and used 2 different styles in the 2 fights. I'm aware of the PEDs and the tainted meat fiasco, and that exposes Canelo to valid criticisms. It sounds to me like he cheated a bit. But man, performance by performance, this guy has been phenomenal. And the quality of his opponents, the variation of styles in opponents, this guy's fight by fight strength of schedule, up to 30 years old, where he is now, is unbelievably strong. He's obviously committed to fighting the best. And I don't think Callum Smith, as good as he is and as imposing as I'm sure he will look early with his tall stance and his long jab, I don't think Callum Smith is ready for this guy, man. Because whether the fight plays out like a technical chess match or it becomes one of those let the boys be boys, stand in there and play last man to remain conscious in the trenches, Canelo's ready for both. One of the most action-packed and dramatic few rounds you will find in recent history is Canelo Alvarez versus James Kirkland. Look at how Canelo responded to that heavy fire and pressure. Canelo's seen it all, and under the Reynosos, he's been improving ever since he broke onto the scene. Yo, I first saw Saul Canelo Alvarez on an undercard for Sugar Shane Mosley versus Sergio Mora back in 2010 in a welterweight fight versus former champ Carlos Baldomir, who'd once upset Zab Judah for the title and then lost it to Floyd Mayweather via decision, and a 20-year-old Canelo Alvarez knocks the former champ Baldomir out cold in the 6th round. And I was pretty skeptical early on how good this kid was, but it was obvious why they'd want to make this guy a thing. Canelo, for those that don't know, means cinnamon in Spanish. It's obviously referencing his red hair. He's a Mexican out of Jalisco, Guadalajara. Kind of has less Fernando Vargas Aztec features and instead kind of looks like Brett Favre. So there were these kind of superficial reasons as to why Saul Canelo Alvarez could be a thing. But what are the chances that he also has the goods? It's like asking, what are the chances that this young emerging star today, Ryan Garcia, who looks like he should be playing the lead heartthrob in a boy band, can also be the baddest man at lightweight over Teofimo Lopez, over Gervonta Tank Davis? So I've got these reservations, but then we see Canelo go from 147 to 154 and wins a vacant title, then defends it by beating Kermit Cintron by knockout, beats an old Shane Mosley via decision, though a dominant decision, beats Josecito Lopez by knockout, although Josecito Lopez shouldn't have been fighting at 154. Canelo then adds a WBA title by winning controversially versus Austin Trout in a close fight where Trout appeared to be winning the early rounds but wasn't winning on the scorecards, which are being announced after every 4 rounds because of this weird Texas set of rules. Just a weird fight altogether. Very unfortunate for Austin Trout, but Canelo adds his world title to the collection. Life goes on. And that's where Canelo then challenges a 36-year-old but still amazingly sharp Floyd Mayweather and loses via clear decision. It was ruled a majority decision, but that was pretty bogus judging. Watch the fight. Now, Canelo can handle that type of a loss one of a couple ways. Being badly outclassed, even if you don't get knocked out, can be very damaging to a fighter, psychologically. And Canelo was only 23, so what's he gonna do now? Well, he responds by stopping the once scary contender Alfredo Angulo, and then wins another controversial decision, this time versus Cuban boxing sweet scientist Erislandy Lara, who go on to win and defend titles at 154. Quality win for Canelo, very close and controversial win, but Erislandy Lara is a very, very tough matchup for anybody, and Canelo at least conducted himself pretty evenly, again, was rewarded the decision. He then knocks James Kirkland out in a hellacious firefight where James Kirkland was basically emptying the clip from the opening bell, and by I think it was like the 3rd or 4th round, Canelo knocked James Kirkland unconscious. He then goes up to 160 and fights for the title there against equally undersized Miguel Cotto, the aging future Hall of Famer and 4-division champ, probably well past Cotto's prime in fairness, although Cotto had just beaten Sergio Martinez and Daniel Gill. Canelo wins that middleweight title fight versus Cotto in another close decision win. Freddie Roach, Cotto's trainer at the time, thought that Cotto should have won. Cotto thought that Cotto should have won. Some thought that Cotto should have won. Close fight. Canelo was awarded the decision. And then Canelo wins another 3 fights in the lead up to Triple G. And then finally fights a total of 24 rounds versus that generational killer, where the courage of the performance and the quality of the fights has unfortunately been overshadowed by the controversies of the decisions. I tend to believe that both Triple G and Canelo left a part of themselves in the ring in both of those fights. But because of their ages, I feel like Canelo was able to preserve more of his total self than Triple G. That Triple G fight versus Derevianchenko afterwards, that didn't help him long-term either. But Canelo kind of emerged from those 2 Triple G fights essentially a made man in boxing. And he has since beaten Rocky Fielding at 168, former champ Daniel Jacobs at 160, and then the old crusher Sergey Kovalev at 175. Now, I kind of expect Callum Smith to potentially be a tougher fight than all 3 of those post-Triple G fights. Although I don't want to slight 2-time champ Daniel Jacobs, but even Jacobs has often discussed how damaging the 160-pound weight cut was for him versus Canelo. But either way, Canelo boxed brilliantly. I was looking at that Canelo versus Jacobs matchup going in like it was nearly a 50-50 fight. But Canelo kind of schooled him. You had 5'8", 5'8" Canelo channeling his inner Pernell Whitaker with his head and body movement in the pocket versus a 6-foot Daniel Jacobs, making Jacobs miss with most of his meaningful power punches. I was blown away. Now, at 168, where Canelo's going to be fighting Callum Smith on December 19th, Canelo hasn't yet fought any of the better fighters there. No top 5s or even top 10s at 168. He's only fought Rocky Fielding. But when Canelo fought in the weight class above that last November, he eventually knocked out a past his prime 36-year-old but still formidable Sergey Kovalev, who was once truly the crusher, probably the most devastating puncher in boxing, non-heavyweight, along with Triple G, Golovkin. Now, I'd had Kovalev slightly up on the cards through the first half of the Kovalev-Canelo fight. Canelo closed the distance slowly. He had trouble getting in early, but Kovalev started getting fatigued, and then hit, and then hurt, and then unconscious in that order very quickly. Knocked out cold in the 11th. Rewatched the way Canelo hunted Kovalev in that 11th round. That was Canelo at 175, light heavyweight. At 168, he just outclassed Rocky Fielding, who'd had a couple promising moments early, but it was soon evident that he could do nothing to stop Canelo from punishing him to the body, so he was soon finished. But the most likely way for Canelo versus Callum Smith to play out, in my view, is that Callum Smith will fight tall, as always. Canelo may have trouble closing the distance early. It might appear that he's at the mercy of Smith's jab. Smith will have a 7-inch height advantage here. So Canelo can either use some of that head and upper body movement and those instincts that he showcased versus Daniel Jacobs and versus Golovkin in their first fight, where Triple G was the aggressor. Canelo can also try throwing a right hand either over the top or under Smith's jab. Now, Smith likes to throw a double jab and sometimes triples up on the jabs. So if you're Canelo, you don't want to plan the right hand over the jab and then walk right into Smith's second jab or jab number 3. You see fighters actually get hurt from some of those jab scenarios. See the recent Terrence Crawford versus Kell Brook fight. I mean, a jab is still a hard punch at the end of the day. So you don't want to walk into one of those if you're Canelo trying to counter. Canelo can do a high guard type of thing. Sometimes you see fighters go into certain fights with their hands like all the way up and with less movement, and is often uncharacteristic of the fighter's style. And you're kind of wondering, why is he just sitting there like a sitting duck with his hands all the way up like that? Think Floyd Mayweather style versus Conor McGregor in much of their fight. So Canelo can fight Smith's jab with the high guard while walking him down and investing early to Smith's body. However, when you use that walk him down with the high guard style, you're kind of leaving yourself at risk. if, one, the jab splits the high guard, if it comes through the guard, or two, if a left hook comes around the high guard and crashes into the side of your head around your ear. Canelo would be careful with this because Smith's reach would definitely enable him to reach around Canelo's high guard. Again, Smith has a 7-inch height advantage over Canelo. By the way, the high guard also preserves the energy that would be required if you were to instead use that style with the head and upper body movement. That requires a lot more burning of calories than walking somebody down with the high guard. So it'll be interesting to see how Canelo navigates this early without losing rounds to that jab and to the threat of Smith's hard right hand. Because remember, Kovalev won most of those early to middle rounds. It took Canelo some time to truly be able to crash the pocket on Kovalev. I think it might take him a little while here too. Callum Smith is defensively responsible and manages distance somewhat well. It could be better. Watch his landmark victory over George Groves, and that was an old Groves. That's Groves' final fight of his career, and he gave Smith some trouble before he got finished. And Callum Smith's latest fight, that was supposed to be kind of a showcase for Callum Smith versus John Ryder, almost a ritualistic sacrifice to help the zone make the streaming gods proud and happy, and to have Callum Smith looking like a pound-for-pound list level talent. So I'm watching Smith versus Ryder, and I'm thinking, my God, John Ryder might be spoiling the party. He's probably winning this fight through 4, then through 6, then through 9. I'm still waiting for Callum Smith to make some statement. Turn this thing around. Drop Ryder. Maybe not knock him out, but just down. You probably need a rally to win this, Callum. Because through 9, Ryder keeps getting inside on him and letting his hands go. And Callum Smith isn't hitting him with any of those long and sharp shots that he likes to throw. So through 9, you've got this growing concern in Smith's hometown of Liverpool, England. Shout out to the Beatles. And then in round 10, 11, and 12, it's John Ryder who's finishing the fight strong. I think I had him winning all 3 of those. BoxingScene.com judged the fight like 117 to 111 for Ryder, but the official judges scored the fight unanimously for Callum Smith, who wins via decision. Go figure. And even if you thought that Smith won that fight, which shoot, let me know if you did, because I sure don't get it. Even a pro-Smith crowd is walking out of this one like, let's just say DAZN wanted to cut the cameras and move on. Nothing to see here, folks. Tune in next week for Tevin Farmer's next bout. Look, on paper, this is another very high-level opponent for Canelo. Add him to the list, along with Jacobs, Lara, Old Mosley, Trout, Kovalev, Triple G. But as the saying goes, styles truly make fights. By the way, I would add, as does money. Styles and money make fights. But the styles here favor Canelo through 12 rounds. If Canelo is truly in shape and can fight as sharp and as composed a second half of the fight as he did against Kovalev. Ooh, Canelo's combinations could be nasty. Callum Smith tends to slow down in spots too, and his offensive game isn't the most imaginative, nor does it usually need to be. But I also don't think that Smith is doing himself any favors with this cut all the way down to 168. Callum Smith is 6'3", and he's not as skinny as, say, Paul the Punisher Williams, who somehow was able to fight as low as 147 and was nearly the same height as Callum Smith. But I think that Callum Smith's time at 168 is very limited. He's 30 now. And I wonder whether he's going to be as energetic as Canelo after the 6th or 7th round, since Canelo doesn't have to cut weight as dramatically. Shoot, some believe we're not done seeing Canelo at 160, the weight class below. Plus, the fight being announced on such short notice really kind of speeds up what Callum Smith has to do to get his training and his weight right. So that's probably going to be a disadvantage for Callum Smith. So I think that Canelo is going to walk into the ring more comfortably than Smith. And he might still lose 2 out of the first 3 rounds. The fight might even look somewhat even through rounds 4 or round 6. If Smith can keep Canelo from hurting him early. I do expect Canelo to invest in the body early and often. But I just don't see Smith putting Canelo's lights out with that signature right hand. I just don't. Maybe it does catch him, but I would guess that he won't really blast him with it in full force and extension. Canelo's just really good defensively. And if Smith isn't blasting him with that, is he doing enough jabbing and left hooking to keep Canelo from whacking him to the body or sharpshooting him with his wickedly laser-like combinations? I don't think Smith survives 12 rounds with Canelo, so I'm taking Canelo via KO TKO, which would be another milestone for Canelo in capturing a major title at 168 and basically becoming the #1 fighter at 168. Keep in mind, Caleb Plant has the IBF belt and Billy Joe Saunders holds the WBO, but the WBC belt is currently vacant because of David Benevidez' inability to make weight in his recent title defense. So that leaves WBA champ Callum Smith, who also has the unofficial but still esteemed Ring Magazine title and is ranked above Benevidez and Caleb Plant. So Callum Smith is technically the man at 168. And I say technically because although he's ranked higher by Ring Magazine, he still hasn't fought Plant, Saunders, or Benevidez. He never fought James DeGale or Bout Jack or Chris Eubank Jr. But Canelo beating Smith here would still allow him to kind of leapfrog the other three and sit high with his WBA 168-pound title to add to his, he still has a couple titles at 160. But once you get to the point of your career that Canelo's at, holding the title really means nothing. You're now the one calling the shots. People who are not in a position to call the shots benefit from having a title. Canelo kind of transcends that at this point. The same way Floyd Mayweather did, the same way that Sugar Ray Leonard did in the 80s. But I expect Canelo to rise to the occasion here in a very ambitious and very high-risk fight on December 19th, given Canelo's free agency and that this fight is a one-off pairing with Eddie Hearn's Matchroom Boxing promotion who partner with the DAZN platform in service. So the pressure is on here. And this is a very losable fight for Canelo. You know, I'd actually bet against Canelo 3 times. Twice versus Triple G and against Daniel Jacobs. That's 0-3 if you're keeping score. But I think Canelo eventually thrashes Smith via stoppage. But let me know what you think of this return of Saul Canelo Alvarez and his choice in opponent, Callum Smith. This is exciting. Canelo at 168 is still a very unknown thing, especially when you take on the elite. And that's what Smith is. I'm pretty excited about this. But please, leave your comments in the comments, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.